All right, buddy, bear with me here. Okay, so what you are working on is factoring. And factoring is just kind of undoing distributive property. So if that makes sense, if I've got 2 times 4x plus 3, right? And I'm going to distribute, then I'm going to get 8x plus 6, right? So factoring is actually starting here and then working my way backwards. I'm kind of undoing the distributive property, if that makes sense to you. So if I would look at this and say I want to factor it, I'd say, all right, well, what's a common factor? The greatest common factor between these two, right? Okay, and actually that is just 2. And now remember the difference between a factor and a multiple. A factor is what makes up a number. Like, hey, 2 times 3 is 6 and 2 times 4 is 8. Those are factors, whereas 8, 16, 24, 32, those are multiples. Okay, so know the difference there, right? So 2 is the greatest common factor. So I'm going to put 2 on the outside. And now instead of multiplying, I am doing the opposite. I'm undoing it. So the opposite of multiplication is division, right? So I'm dividing. 8x divided by 2. 4x plus, keep my sign, 6 divided by 2 is 3, right? So I just kind of showed you how to distribute and then how to factor. It's basically just undoing each other, all right? And that's what you're basically doing to the best of your knowledge throughout this entire test, right? So here, t squared minus 3t minus 10 equals 0. The first thing you're always asking yourself is, number 1, do I have anything in front of this number? Variable right there. And I don't, and that's my best case scenario. My best case scenario. So now I'm going to factor out. When I factor a polynomial, I am going to be sure to have 2 sets here. All right, so let me walk this one through you on a different piece of paper. We have 2 squared minus 3t minus 10. Now, this is set equal to 0 because it's asking me for that value, and that's a little different, and we'll finish that up. But factoring is super important, and we're going to go through that first. Because I have nothing here in front of t squared, I do not have to do a first step. Now, I'm specifically going into factoring. When I factor, I'm going to have 2 things here, right? Because this is going to turn into FOIL when I'm dealing with a squared or a cubed or a to the 4th power. Anything bigger than squared. I'm going into into what would be FOIL. So right here, I'm going to look at this and say I have t squared. So I like to teach my kids like this. All right, 2 t's. You get a t, you get a t, right? And then in here, I have 2 negatives. So I need this bigger number to be negative, and because it's negative here, it means my signs are different. So I know that one's negative and one's positive, right? Now, I'm going to come over here, and this is my important number. So I'm going to say 10. What are the factors of 10? Well, I've got 2 and 5 and 1 and 10, right? I forgot 1 and 10. 1 and 10 and 2 and 5. And then they start repeating. So then I'm going to ask myself, which of these factors added or subtracted together would give me negative 3? So 5 and 2, if I subtract them, would give me 3. That's what I'm looking for. 5 and 2 gives me 3. So I need the number to be negative, which means my larger number is going to be negative. And my smaller number is going to be positive. So now if I said negative 5 plus 2, that gives me negative 3. And 5 times 2 is 10. Negative 5 times positive 2 is negative 10. They all go together. This is completely factored. If I were to redo it and apply FOIL, it's going to give me this answer. Okay? Now, it's set equal to 0, and it asks me what's the value. So now, because it's set equal to 0, I'm going to do this. T minus 5 equals 0, and solve for that. I'm going to add 5 to both sides, and t equals 5. And then t plus 2 equals 0. I'm going to subtract that 2 on both sides, and t equals negative 2. So my answers are 5 and negative 2, right? But then your paper asks you one more thing. So you got to make sure you're always answering the final question. It's a lot of work. And it says, with a being greater than b, what's the value of a minus b? So if a is greater than b, that means 5 is greater than negative 2. So I'm going to say 5 minus b, a negative 2. And what does that equal? Well, I'm going to have 5 plus 2 because a double negative becomes a plus. And that makes my final answer to that problem 7. Okay, so we have talked about factoring, factoring, distributing and the factoring, undoing one another, and looking at this just like that. I am undoing this FOIL problem and getting back to its base of what it should be. And those were the steps that we used, right? Okay, now, again here, same situation. I have nothing in front of the x, so I skip step 1. And I'm going here, 20. What are my factors of 20? 2 and 10, 4 and 5, and then I go back here. Well, I need those things to equal 12. Well, 10 plus 2 is 12. Negative 12 is what I need, so I need a negative 10 and a negative 2. Does that make sense? Two negatives, make a positive. Yes. So again, it's going to be x squared. Good. You get an x, you get an x. And then 20, 10 times 2, and they're both negative. Negative 10 and negative 2. If I used FOIL, I am going to get that answer right there. Okay? So anything that does not have a number in front of x squared is going to be worked this same way. Now, why did I not solve for 0? It didn't ask me to. It didn't set it equal to 0. So I wasn't finding it. I was just finding something equivalent to it. Or you will also see them ask you to simplify that. Okay. Now, this one here is different. We're working with a perfect square. Let me come back over to this pad. And we've got 16x squared. Give me a second. Getting used to not having this phone up on a stand because I'm at work. And 81. Okay, so I have nothing in between. So I'm looking at the fact that I have a square here, perfect square, 16 is, and 81 is also a perfect square. So if I take the square root of 16 and the square root of 81, I'm going to get 4 and I'm going to get 9, right? Okay, so I still have the x squared there. And so I'm thinking this way. Perfect square, you get a 4x, you get a 4x, right? And this is negative, which means I'm going to have one negative sign, one positive, because when my signs are different, my answer is negative. And what was 81 squared? 9. So you get a 9, and you get a 9. And that's how we're going to undo a perfect square. Okay? All right, moving on. Number 4. Again, we're just x squared, nothing in front. And here we are. If its width is x minus 7, what is the binomial which represents its length? Okay, so what we're working on here is we know that one of them is x minus 7. They told us that. So I'm thinking to myself, all right, I've got to factor this out. I'm talking about area, which is length times width. So here is width, x minus 7. So now I'm only having to figure this out. I'm going to do the same steps. What are my factors of 21? 1 and 21, that doesn't equal 10. 3 and 7, hey, that equals 10. I already know I'm using a 7 because it was given to me. So I'm just trying to locate this guy. Well, now I know it's going to be 3. And it's up to you to figure out, oh, is that going to be a positive 3 or a negative 3? Well, if 10 is negative, I needed a negative 7 and a negative 3. And then a negative times a negative is a positive 21. So this question, why did I just circle x minus 3 when factored it's x minus 3 times x minus 7? Again, it's so important to answer the final question. What is the binomial which represents its length? It was just asking me for length because it already gave me width. That's why I circled only x minus 3. All right, and here I kept saying, we're skipping the first step. We're skipping the first step because nothing had anything in front of an x prior to this one, okay? So now we've got 2x squared minus x minus 10, and there we go back to equal to 0. Always pay attention to that. If I have equal to 0, I'm not just simplifying or factoring. I then have to set what I factor equal to 0. So it's a whole nother step. This one's got a lot going on, so I'm going to work it out for you over here. All right, so the first thing I do when I have any number in front of the x squared, t squared, whatever that number might be, is try to see, do I have a greatest common factor? That's my first step. Do I have a GCF? Well, 2, 1, and 10, I don't, because it would just be 1. So in this case, I'm going to use the slip and slide method, which you might have learned from your teacher. So I'm going to take this 2, and I'm going to bring it over here and multiply it times the 10. That 2 does not really go away, right? Okay, it's going to stay off to the side. I'm not going to forget about it. And now I have x squared minus x minus 20 because I just said 2 times 10, right? Again, set equal to 0. So now here's my focus on factoring. So I know I'm going to need 2, correct? I know, hey, you get an x and you get an x, right? They're both negative, so I know I'm going to have a negative and a positive. And now I'm going to go to this 20, and I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to ask myself, all right, how do I get 1? Well, 20 is 1 times 20. 20 minus 1 is not going to give me 1. Right? Then I have 2 and 10. Is anything between 2 and 10 plus 2 plus 10, 10 minus 2? No, nothing's going to give me 1. And how about 4 times 5? Bingo, right? 4 and 5 can give me 1. Again, I need a negative 1 to be my answer. So I'm going to put the 5 here and the 4 here. Why? Because negative 5 plus 4 gives me negative 1. Negative 5 times 4 gives me negative 20. Okay, so, great, we're done. We factored. No, because remember we multiplied by that guy, and I said, hey, don't forget about it. We got to just keep him tagging along. Now we're going to slide him back in, and we're going to divide by him. So that 2 is now going to come here, and we're going to divide. So now I have x minus 5 halves and x plus 4 halves, right? So simplify here. I can't do that. So this guy's going to slide back in front. We got a lot of slipping and sliding going on here, right? So 2x minus 5 is that one's final answer. But here, 4 divided by 2 is 2. So I'm just going to say x plus 2. Now I have completely factored this one. Okay? So 2x times x, 2x squared, right? 2x times 2, that's 4x. And then negative 5x, that gives me my negative x. And then negative 5 times 2, negative 10. This is completely factored because when I FOIL it, it gives me this answer. Remember, I keep talking about we're just undoing. Okay? But this one was set equal to 0, which means I have a few more steps to go. So now I've got to set both of these sets equal to 0. So 2x minus 5 equals 0, and x plus 2 is equal to 0, right? Plus 5 on both sides. 2x equals 5. Divide by 2. I'm going fast because this should be second nature to you. At this point, one of my x's is equal to 5 halves. Subtract 2 on both sides. And x is equal to negative 2. And my answers are 5 halves and negative 2. All right, that's the two solutions. to that problem. All right, now I'm going to do one more because this will teach you how to use your greatest common factor without slip and slide. So basically, we've kind of gone over each one that can present itself so far. And the last one is going to be using GCF. So we have some big numbers here. We got 16w cubed minus 24w squared plus 32w. So I'm coming here, and again, because I have something in front of my first variable, I'm asking myself, do I have a common factor between all these numbers? And I do. 16, 24, and 32 are all divisible by 8. So their greatest common factor is 8. But in this one in particular, I have a w here, a w here, and a w here. So we're going to take out the smallest w, the smallest power w. So my greatest common factor is actually 8w, because they all have the w in common too. That doesn't always happen. When you see it, make sure you don't forget about it. All right, so now again, like I said, I'm unfactoring basically. So I'm now, instead of multiplying, I'm dividing. So 16 divided by 8 is 2, and w3 divided by w is w squared. Remember, that's your exponent rules, and it says when I divide exponents, I subtract them. Okay, when I divide exponents, subtract them. So that's like 3 minus this little 1 being there. Okay, keep my sign, subtract. 24 divided by 8 is 3, and w squared divided by w is going to be just w, because 2 minus 1 is 1. And then plus, keep my sign, 32 divided by 8 is 4, and 1 minus 1w is no w's. All right, and I can't factor that out anymore. So that is factored or simplified. Okay. All right, so we've done a bunch of different ways, right? We've factored without anything in front of our square, and we've solved for 0. So we could stop here, or we can continue to solve for 0. Okay, here we just had to find an equivalent, and so we stopped at factoring. Here we learned about our perfect square, where it's a perfect square in the beginning and a perfect square in the end. All right, here we learned to pay attention to that final question, right? So we learned about, hey, I know I need to factor this out, but then, hey, what's my final question here? I need to know the length. Width was given, what's the length? And we kind of got to work our way around a problem and figure that out. Here, we've used the slip and slide method. Here, we were just doing greatest common factor, which included a variable on that one. Okay, so as we go through here, this one, again, greatest common factor, had both a variable and a number. Can't make anything any smaller, so we stop. Right here, the basic factoring, and then solving for 0. Okay, and again here, we're just factoring, solving for 0, making sure when I'm set equal to 0 that I'm solving for that 0. When you have a number on the outside and you're solving for 0, so your greatest common factor, it's also set equal to 0. Pay attention to that here. So 2x was my common factor here, and it is also set equal to 0 as one of my answers. Not just 4x equals 5 is set equal to 0, but so is 2x on the outside. Okay. All right, again, slip and slide method is used here. Here we just factored. Okay, it asked us, hey, what's your positive solution? Well, here we went ahead and moved over the 48 to set this correctly. X squared plus 2x minus 48 equals 0, and we solved. And which one was the positive solution? Well, I had a negative 8 and a positive 6, so my answer is the positive 6. Okay, and then the rest of these were simply just factoring out. They're all worked out for you step by step. You have a particular question and they call me, right? Some of them may have a greatest common factor, and then you still need to use slip and slide. That's what happened here, okay? This one's a little more simple, okay? But don't forget that big thing when we slip and slide. When we slip, we've got to come slide back, right? And divide here. All right, so hopefully this clears up a lot of stuff for you. If you have questions tonight, you may send me a message. Thanks. Good luck to you.